How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Set 6, and today we're going to be talking about what the Final Fantasy VII Remake project is, because the subject's come up again in a big way on Twitter and YouTube and other platforms, and, you know, we should probably discuss it. So, we're just going to jump straight into it, like the video, subscribe for future content, but let's do this. So like I say, recently the conversation about whether or not the remake project is actually a remake or if it's a sequel has come up again. And as usual, there are varying reasons why people favour one option over another. These reasons vary, and you know, it could be shipping, it could be purism, it could be the events that have taken place in the game, it could be developer comments. There's a wide scope of what these reasons could be. And it's still a topic that's pretty wide open in my mind, and it's one of the things that I think the devs have done a really great job of, keeping that question dangling, keeping the conversation going. You could definitely deliver a convincing argument either way, whether you believe it's an expanded remake or a sequel. And I guess that's what I'm about to try to do. Now, I'm very much in the sequel camp. Those of you that are long-time viewers of the channel will know this, and for me, the events of Final Fantasy VII Remake locked me into that belief. Rebirth just kind of reinforced that thought process. But I am still open to the possibility of it being a remake. There would have to be a lot of explaining, tweaking, jostling, shuffling and moving of things in order for that to make sense for me, but I am open to it. Some theories and ideas answer a lot of the questions that are brought up in the project, but I don't think they answer all of them together collectively. Whereas I feel like the project itself being a sequel of some sort does answer these questions. One of the more popular hand waves towards certain things in the remake project is that it's predestination or premonitions or precognition or something like that. And while that can explain some things, like the memories that people seem to have access to that they shouldn't have access to, it doesn't explain other things, like Sephiroth actually manifesting the events that happen, things like Meteor Fall, and absorbing them at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake. It doesn't explain the worlds and the way that people and objects seem to be able to travel between these worlds. So for me, some of these theories fall short, and that doesn't mean that there aren't additional theories that coincide with these that could do everything. And in this video, what I want to talk about is not reasons why I don't think it's a remake necessarily, but focus on things that make me think it's a sequel. They're kind of the same thing, but you know what I mean. I'm going to approach it from that perspective. And while there may be answers to some of these things individually where you could say, oh, but it could be this way and then it's still a remake, I've still not yet seen a single compelling argument for a remake that encompasses everything. Anyway, sequel. There were a few things in Final Fantasy VII Remake that made me think that the project overall was a sequel, but the main one is Sephiroth himself. Now in the OG, Sephiroth doesn't remember Cloud when they first meet on the Junon Ferry, and the Junon Ferry is the first point where we actually see Sephiroth. But in Remake, Sephiroth immediately makes a beeline for Cloud, making his presence known and beginning the process of messing with Cloud by first hitting him with a flashback of Nibelheim burning, and then leading Cloud off down an alley to mess with him further. Sephiroth's doing everything that he can in this moment to get a reaction out of Cloud by digging up the memories of his mother's death. And even when Cloud first meets Aerith, Sephiroth pops up telling Cloud that he's too weak to save anyone, obviously hinting at Aerith's fate in the OG and Cloud's struggles dealing with the guilt of not being able to save her. This is something that Sephiroth made a beeline straight for in an attempt to destabilize Cloud. But why? Why has Sephiroth gone from not remembering Cloud at all in the OG to now being immediately focused on him? It's almost as if he already knows that Cloud is the key to everything, something that Sephiroth doesn't realise until after Final Fantasy VII. All the way through Remake, Sephiroth's acting differently, doing things differently, prodding at Cloud more and more as the game progresses. We even see Sephiroth swooping in and grabbing Jenova after the other version of Sephiroth is defeated by the party. And in the very end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, Sephiroth baits the party into defying destiny, which they do. And from that moment on, it feels almost like the future events that we've been seeing all the way through Remake via the memories that Aerith has access to and the memories shown to everyone during the Whisper Harbinger fight disconnect. Those future memories are no longer guaranteed, and this is why Sephiroth is then able to manifest them and absorb them into himself, bolstering his power further than it may ever have been before. But again, why is Sephiroth doing all of this? Him being able to see the future could explain him making a beeline for Cloud, because he'd see that Cloud is the problem, and therefore attempt to control the problem. But he doesn't really do anything too different from the OG as far as the broad strokes. He's still trying to drive Cloud into that pit of despair. He's still just trying to manipulate Cloud rather than trying to take him out. The only real difference is the intensity and the time that he starts doing this. He brings it forwards by half of the game pretty much. The real difference comes from his interactions at the end of Remake, where he baits the party into doing what he wants, breaking the flow of events as they're meant to be, and then giving him access to this power. And once the chain of events in this world are broken, all of that energy from the potential future is just loose, unattached, and we see Sephiroth absorb it and take that power for himself. So what we have is a remake in a world where the future has been disconnected and seemingly absorbed by Sephiroth. The party have defied fate and destiny, and the knock-on effect is the survival of Zack Fair in another world. And this was something that everyone speculated about heavily, the variety of worlds that we were going to see. Everyone kind of thought, well, not everyone, but a lot of people were thinking, oh, it's two timelines, one of them's the real timeline and one of them's this branched off one. And in fairness, none of us were prepared for what we actually got, which is seemingly at least 7 different worlds, 2 of which we have no idea of yet. We don't know where those worlds are. We've got a stamp representation for 5 of the 7 worlds, but nothing for the first 2. And I would hazard that at least one of those worlds is the OG. And when you couple that existence of a multitude of worlds, some of which we don't know about yet, and this breaking of fate and destiny that we see, and the impact that breaking fate and destiny can have by creating these branched worlds, it leans much more heavily into this narrative going in a different direction than the OG does. And not only that, using the events of the OG as a reference point for what it's trying to do. And if it's using these events as a reference point, then surely that suggests it's a sequel. Not only that, if Sephiroth has got the ability to branch these memories off and break them and absorb the power from them, surely that suggests that these events have, at least in some capacity, already happened, because otherwise there'd be nothing to absorb except potential. But he seems like he's absorbing something very real at both the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And for me, in order for that to be the case, the events of the OG have to have at least happened in some capacity. But anyway, that's enough for Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now we're going to move on to Rebirth. And Rebirth presents us a world that, while it shares many similarities with the world of Final Fantasy VII, it also has some differences. Now, a fair number of these things can be put down to expansion and just general alterations to the world of Final Fantasy VII, such as the existence of the Republic of Junon and all the expanded lore that we get for that, Fort Condor being replaced by Crow's Nest, new characters popping up in the world, the difference in tone at Cosmo Canyon. All of these things can be put down to just general expansion. But when it comes to things like the heightened conflict between Wutai and Shinra, the new weapons that seem to be patrolling the live stream, the expedited decline of Cloud's mental state, the worlds being established by Sephiroth as a core component of the planet, all while Zack is traversing these worlds, and the question around the fate of Aerith, this is all different. This isn't just expanded, this is different, and it takes certain things that were fact in Final Fantasy VII, and in some cases flips them 180. I mean, even stuff like Gilgamesh establishing the connection that there is separate dimensions, and using very similar imagery to what we see with the worlds. And even Chadley creating an arc of the memories experienced by Cloud and the party. And don't worry, there is a Chadley video still coming. It has been worked on. I've had to shelve it a little bit because I've been busy. But we will be coming back to the Chadley video, because Chadley could be nothing, or he could be something massive. And I don't know which it is. So we'll talk about that. But all of these things that I've just mentioned put us back into the territory of massive changes to Final Fantasy VII's overall framework, not just simple expansion, because all of these things feed in to the changes that Sephiroth is making to the world. Sephiroth is the one that's pushing the Wu-Tai conflict and using this image of Glenn to push Rufus and to control Rufus and make Rufus do what he wants him to do. Sephiroth is the one that's attacked the new weapons when they've popped up. Sephiroth's the one that's pushed Cloud further and further into the hole. Sephiroth explains the worlds to us while also using them to his own ends and rejecting Zack from them. And, as always, Sephiroth tries to kill Aerith and simultaneously succeeds in killing her while also being stopped by Cloud. And when Cloud does stop him, because he does, Cloud does stop him as well as not stopping him, it's like a Schrodinger's Aerith kind of moment, but in that moment where Cloud stops him, Sephiroth is loving it. Sephiroth is so happy that Cloud's done that, because this gives Sephiroth another moment where destiny has been broken, and he immediately goes into his rant about the converging of worlds and everything like that. So Sephiroth's getting exactly what he wants. Sephiroth's doing what he wants to do. And in the same way that Sephiroth used that moment at the end of Remake, he uses this moment again, like I say, where fate and destiny are defied, to set the next part of his plan in motion. Now, we don't know what that plan is, really, at this point. It's probably going to fall in line with the previous plans that he's had, where he wants to take up all of the Lifestream's energy and control it, and use the planet as a vessel. That's probably going to be along the lines of what Sephiroth's plan is. But does any of this match up with what Sephiroth does in the OG? Yeah, the end game might be the same, but Sephiroth getting involved in the Wu-Tai War doesn't happen in the OG. Sephiroth doesn't attack these random weapons that also aren't in the OG. Sephiroth does push Cloud, but he's doing a much better job of it. And at no point does Sephiroth take us on a little tour through the worlds and push Zack out of the worlds and things like that. None of these things happen in the OG. So, if these actions don't match up with the OG's narrative, and they don't really fit into the realms of simple expansion, then the only answer is that while similar, the remake project is not the OG.
Great. So where does this leave us?
The remake Ultimania gives us a strong answer, in the form of an interview with Tetsuya Nomura, where he states explicitly that the remake project is the 5th part of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, and is something that they wanted to do a long time ago, but Nomura just didn't have the manpower, so it got shelved. And now the manpower is available, so they've come back to it. Now, if the Final Fantasy VII Remake project is part of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, then surely it has to stand apart from Final Fantasy VII, right? I mean, we're not just going to redo Final Fantasy VII and add it to the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. That feels a bit silly. And if Final Fantasy VII was meant to be a part of the compilation, then there were already 5 parts of the compilation, which would make Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 6 of the compilation, which it isn't. This statement from Nomura makes me think that they viewed the compilation of Final Fantasy VII as separate to Final Fantasy VII, which it is. It is the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, which then also suggests that if the remake project is the 5th part of the compilation, then it is also separate to Final Fantasy VII, and therefore cannot be a simple remake of that original game. So if we take the actions and motivations of Sephiroth, all of the weird Omni-Aerith stuff that goes on, all of the other little changes to the narrative like I've been saying about Wu-Tai and things like that, and the world of Final Fantasy VII, and couple that with the real-world suggestion that the remake is the 5th part of the compilation, and all of the weird terminology used by the devs where they dance around what the remake actually is, leaves me with only one suggestion. The remake is a sequel. But then I suppose the final question becomes, a sequel to what? Where in the timeline, which is a contentious term, I know, but where in the timeline does Remake sit? It's at the very least post-OG, but could it go even further and be post-Advent Children, or post-Dirge of Cerberus? And for me, they are the 3 main options for where the remake sits. Not that there are really any other options. It's either post-AC or Dirge of Cerberus Sephiroth, having been defeated multiple times, taking one last shot at trying to change his fate and change his destiny. And this is the way that he's found to do it. Obviously, we have no idea how he's done that from the OG and created all of this. These are things that we'll probably learn in part 3, I hope we do. But that's one option, it's post-Dirge or Advent Children Sephiroth. Or, the other option is that the events of Remake are happening in between the OG and Advent Children, which leaves the possibility that this all links up to Advent Children, as the devs have said a few times. Although, something after AC or even Dirge could also link up to Advent Children, just not in the conventional sense, and this comes back to the terminology that we've been seeing a lot from the devs, where they've been very non-committal about certain things, which makes sense. They want things like this. They want videos like this and people talking, and they want this. So why would they tell us? But also, if the events of Remake are happening in between the OG and Advent Children, then this really heavily makes me believe that the Remake project is a manifestation of the struggle between Aerith and Sephiroth that goes on in livestream Black and White, where we find out about Sephiroth reconstituting himself and reordering himself within the livestream in order to persist and continue forwards. And we learn about Aerith and how she has some control over what's going on in the livestream and how she's trying to fight against Sephiroth and stop him from doing what he's doing. Sounds pretty familiar, that, doesn't it? Sounds pretty familiar. So that's a strong possibility that while this is a sequel, it's only a sequel to the events of the OG, and it's a manifestation of livestream Black and White. I think that's a very strong possibility, but I'm also still very open to it being post-Advent Children, because we do see the fingerprints of Advent Children a lot in the Remake project. Like that final scene in Final Fantasy VII Remake where we fight Sephiroth and we're in that destroyed Midgar. That is one of the most Advent Children evoking things that I think we've seen so far. So that and a few other things leave me very open to it being post-Advent Children, but it's at the very least post-OG for me, based on everything that I've just gone over. So yeah, they're my main arguments for why the Remake project is a sequel, both from an in-game narrative perspective and a real-world dev comments perspective. A lot of people are resistant to the Remake being a sequel because they're afraid of change, and this then pushes them down the road of, oh, it's just a remake with expansion and a few tweaks, yeah. But really, they're just afraid of the story that they know and love being altered and becoming unrecognisable. And in all honesty, if you told me prior to the Final Fantasy VII Remake beginning that it was going to change and it was going to be different, I would have been super concerned. And even post-remake, for the first few days, I was a little bit like, oh god, what are they doing? Ooh. But then I started to think about it a bit more. Things started to click more into place. I played through it again, and yeah, it's kind of brought me, I'm on board with it. I'm surprised that I'm on board with changes to the OG of Final Fantasy VII. But then I suppose that's the thing, even I'm doing it. I'm much more into thinking of this project as a sequel rather than a remake of the OG, because these changes make the OG irrelevant almost, and that should never ever be the case. So maybe this is just copium on my part, and I'm just trying to preserve the OG by separating the remake project from it and declaring it as a sequel. Do you see how you can argue both ways for this? It's a pretty crazy one. It's a pretty crazy one. That's probably where my concerns come from, OG purism. I'm definitely one of those OG purist guys. Sorry, but it is what it is. But the thing that we all need to remember is that regardless of it being a remake or a sequel, that OG version of Final Fantasy VII is still there. It's still always there. We can still always go back to it. Some people, rather than it being a purist thing, are more interested in the shipping aspects, and that's where their concerns come in. Some people are scared certain characters might survive and threaten their ship. But let's be real. The whole shipping thing in Final Fantasy VII, while it's nice and fun, is a very minor aspect of the game, and none of the ships are actually canon as it is anyway. We never actually explicitly see any kind of relationship canonized in any part of the Final Fantasy VII compilation. We see suggestions here and there, but they're very light suggestions so that people can kind of run with it themselves. But the point that I'm trying to make is that you're blinding yourself to the rest of the narrative if you just focus on shipping and make that the core of your relationship with Final Fantasy VII. Like, I feel like you're missing a big piece of the picture if that's the only thing that you're focused on. And that's either way. Like, I'm definitely on the side of Clerith, like those of you that know, but I don't care that much. It's not that big of an aspect of Final Fantasy VII. There are much bigger, grander storylines going on in Final Fantasy VII. So, yeah, most of my focus goes to them, and that's just a preference for me. Whereas it seems like some people make it the whole core of their interaction with Final Fantasy VII, and I think you miss a lot of the big picture. I genuinely do feel like you miss a lot of the big picture. And more to the point, even if the project is a sequel, and even if it does pan out that way, and goes all the way that it is a sequel, it probably won't change anything to do with the shipping debate anyway. Both ships will remain unfulfilled officially, leaving it all down to character choice and preference, and yeah, I just don't see anything regarding that changing. It's probably been the subject that's kept conversation about Final Fantasy VII going for the longest, so why would they kill it? Like, why would they do that? It just makes no sense. Now, don't get me wrong, I could have this whole thing wrong, like I've said, and it is just a remake with expansion. But the amount of narrative gymnastics that I feel like Part 3 will have to do in order to make that pay off is, well, it's astronomical for me. For me, it makes more sense that this is at the very least post-OG, with Sephiroth trying to harness the power of the live stream by using the memories of past events to create or manipulate these worlds to his own ends, and that is how he is gaining power. So yeah, I think we've covered that one. So that's going to be the end of this video. There are aspects of this video that I am going to dive into again in the future and do, much more work on, but I think just in general, the conversation about whether it's a sequel or remake needed to be touched on again, and yeah, this is where I stand with it. Let me know what you're thinking in the comments below and where you stand with what the project is. Like the video, subscribe for future content, but more importantly than all of that, have a great day. Oh, and be nice in the comments. Be nice. Be nice.